Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, Dynasty. I am your host. Week 1 is complete. We now know everything that's real. We learned all the things we need to learn. No, that's not true at all. We're going to try to separate some of the fact from the fiction today. And to help me do that, my good friend Scott Belanger, aka Jax Falcone, aka Dino Game Theory on Twitter, or aka X. What is up? Thank you for being here today, man.
What's going on, Heath? Pleasure to be here and grateful to be part of the show sometimes. So I appreciate you having me on. So yeah, let's rock and roll.
I want to give you a chance before we get started. Like, tell everybody what you've been working on and where they can find your work.
So yeah, we've been my show is The Undrafted on on wherever you can find podcasts. So that's my show, the Dynasty show that I do. But the Undroppables team has been working hard on a ton of awesome projects. I think me personally, the UN score model was something that we put together, which was a wide receiver model that's performing very, very well. It even told us some things that we probably didn't want to believe, like Jalen McMillan and Luke McCaffrey. But yet the model seems to be kind of right about these things. So we're kind of leaning into what the model tells us. That's fun. And then the other exciting project from the Undroppables on our YouTube page, we have something called Uncovered, which is, team-based shows. We have almost every single team. We're adding every single team as we go along. So, whatever your favorite team is, just go to the Undroppables YouTube page and you're likely to find a show about your favorite NFL team.
Awesome stuff. On today's show, we're going to talk about some deeper waiver wire ads. We're going to play a game, buy low or oh no, talking about some of the worst performances from week 1. I did have a question though, and this kind of just leads into my 3 questions for you, but it was from Twitter and it was specifically for the show. And I thought, that's a good thing to ask my guest today. Is Jermaine Burton a stash no matter what this season? Or is he droppable at some point? He has him for $1 and he just was wondering, is there anything that caused you to drop Jermaine Burton this year?
In most dynasty leagues, no. There are some dynasty. He said he's playing a keeper and he's $1. Yeah, probably. I don't know. I mean, that's a different keeper league, obviously a little bit different. But in straight dynasty, I think we got to be looking at Jermaine Burton as a bit of a project. Look, Jermaine Burton also performed very, very well in the model. He was a wide receiver 7 in the model, and the model has no idea that he's a complete lunatic. So that's the problem, is that he does have the skill and the play on the field to compete at a high level. But what's the word out of Cincinnati is that he's not picking up the playbook. He's showing up late, these types of things, right? He's sort of he's a loose cannon. So I think he's a huge risk reward player where I think after a while, we'll just see that he's not going to be able to be an NFL type, player, meaning he can't handle all the ancillary things. But, once he's on the field, I think
here, you think with Kadarius Toney?
Josh Gordon, maybe, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Kadarius Toney. Yeah. I mean, there was a little more going on with the Gordon thing, but with Toney, there wasn't ever, it was just kind of always just weird stuff. And it was also injuries with him, but let's go into the 3 questions.
Yep. Kadarius Toney was also terrible in the model though, by the way. He's, so we didn't like Kadarius Toney.
I hear a lot more from our bubble about don't overreact to week 1.
Right.
Very few, nobody's preaching, oh, you need to react to this thing. I just wonder, what do you think for dynasty managers? What should we react to after week 1?
Well, usage, right? So, I tend to look at usage more than I look at, the results. If I always think of it this way: if you take any single week from 2023 and just use that as this year's week 1, we'd overreact about whatever the hell happened that week. So, in a single sample size of 1 week, you got to slow it down. But you can see trends. You can see, hey, who's playing? Like, for instance, Tucker Kraft played over Luke Musgrave. That's a real signal. Tucker Kraft was coming back from injury. It would have been fully expected for, a player like him to have played behind Luke Musgrave, and yet he played ahead of him. So these are the types of things that, as I see it, that's something to react to, is that usage.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. I had tweeted about this with Cortland Sutton and Calvin Ridley.
Yes, you did.
Earlier, and just their performance was terrible. and their usage specifically in the context of the offense was fantastic. And so, like, it's terrible matchups again in week 2. Maybe you just want to, but I would not be lowering those guys based on bad performance in week 1.
Right.
I do wonder, like, maybe those would count, but who is one guy you're trying to buy low on after week 1? One guy things didn't go well for, but you just don't really care.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. But also your Cortland Sutton, Calvin Ridley thing is pretty interesting because you think about those players, and like we had this about Chris Olave, like he was the air yard, unrealized air yards king. Well, that's because of quarterback play. So I think we can look at, Cortland Sutton and Calvin Ridley and not expect too much rebound because the quarterback play is going to remain a little bit, below average. And so those players, you kind of have to take these things into context.
Right.
I think the player that may be a buy low right now is probably the same buy low as last year, week 1, which is Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I think a lot of people are maybe thinking, hey, this may be a big problem. They just lost to New England. Like there's a lot of, hairs on fire with those two players. And I'd be more than happy to buy either one or both. If I can buy low, I think right now Jamar Chase could be taken away from a fantasy manager for a reasonable cost.
So that's the interesting thing, because like it's been for probably the last 8 months now, Jefferson, Chase, Lamb in that top tier. And I think like most people are going to prefer Jefferson and Lamb to Chase now, but we may get to a point if wide receiver 4 Amon-Ra St. Brown had done anything in week 1, or if Marvin Harrison Jr. had done anything in week 1, or if Puka Nacua had not got hurt in week 1, we might see Chase falling in the rankings. But I think you're right. Like in terms of the value, there may have been a little drop in how many draft picks you have to give up to get him. Doubt. You mentioned quarterback play for Denver. Let's talk about the Broncos and the Panthers. Like there were lots of teams that were terrible, lots of teams to be discouraged about, but those were the two where I just almost felt like, okay, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, is there anybody on either one of those offenses that you have any hope for ever?
It's funny because Heath, you have the question in the show sheet, and my answer is no.
No.
I just put no. I do have some notes and stuff, but it's like, it was funny. I just kind of laughed when I put that answer because it's like, no, especially the Panthers, man. I mean, is there a more dysfunctional team in the NFL right now? Both, ownership all the way down. Like, first of all, drafting even Mingo and Leggett where they did, like awful, awful, awful picks according to, my process. I know I'm not the, but look, I mean, if they literally drafted off of our wide receiver model, they would have had much better picks, and that's me, I'm in your mom's basement, so absolutely just awful job. They obviously butchered the Bryce Young pick. Everything about what they're doing just seems like complete dysfunction. Bryce Young seems lost. I'm not sure it gets better. Dave Canales was supposed to be a little bit of a savior there. No, Sean Payton's smugness is a little concerning. I tweeted why isn't, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Cortland Sutton, 3 wide receivers. Instead, they've got, Vele and like just guys off the street. I don't know. Are these guys that bad? Mims and Franklin, are they that bad? Or they were at least good enough to be drafted in the second and third, first pick of the 4th round, second and third rounds. I mean, they've got to get on the field. I just have no idea what's going on in either spot. And
they can't block for all these running back screens. And so they're useless in this offense. Like if you can't block for Jaleel McLaughlin, which obviously no one's blocking for him anyways, he turned 5 catches into 1 yard. No, I follow up. Does that extend all the way to one guy who's not currently on the active roster, Jonathan Brooks?
It's got to, doesn't it, man? I mean, it's ugly. It really is. I mean, I know situations change. We talk about that in Dynasty all the time, but we're talking this year. Jonathan Brooks was always kind of a 2-year play anyway. I mean, it was never like, oh, I'm going to win the league this year. I might get some juice late in the year, but it's, even, think about all these running backs. Jonathan Taylor didn't win you anything in year 1, but he won you stuff in year 2 and so forth and so on. A lot of these running backs don't necessarily blow up in year 1. We got to hope that something changes. Well, they might have the first pick. Is there a good quarterback this year for Carolina?
We'll find out. It's supposed to be one of the worst quarterback drafts we've had in a while.
Yeah.
But we don't ever know those things in September. Let's take our first break, and then we'll get to my completely and entirely unique game, buy low or oh no.
Yes.
Football action continues. Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances? As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North. It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield. Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
So we're going to play buy low or oh no. Just very easy to understand the game. We'll get a little bit more deeper than that, but we're going to start with Drake London. I took some grief on Sunday night's FFT for saying that in week 2, I couldn't understand seeing Drake London as anything more than a wide receiver 3. He's never been anything more than a wide receiver 3, and Kirk Cousins doesn't look like he's going to make him anything more than a wide receiver 3.
There it is.
But this is a dynasty show, and Drake London's, for at least another 3 or 4 games, Drake London's pedigree still counts for more in dynasty than it does in redraft.
That's
He's
right.
still just 23 years old. Like, there's lots of reasons to be still a top 10 pick. Michael Penix is there. He was a first-round rookie quarterback. He could take over for Kirk Cousins at any moment. Buy low on Drake London in dynasty, or oh no?
Well, so it's more oh no than buy low, but that's because his offseason cost to me was never palatable. I never was comfortable with it, both in redraft and in dynasty. He was a top 10 or 12 wide receiver in both formats. He was a round 2 pick in startups, all way too expensive. And I know keep trade cut and everything, but I'd like to see him down. Put it this way: would you rather have Rashee Rice or Drake London in dynasty?
Right. I was just getting ready to do this exercise with you and go through some of those names, and Rashee Rice would have been on the list. One of the bigger risers.
It's not even close either, right?
Yeah.
I'm Rashee Rice by so Rashee is ranked further down than Drake London, and we should have had Rashee over him the entire time, really. Or at least close, and it wasn't close. So for me, I need to see the value for Drake London come way, way down. And you can do the thing where, you ask me about this or that, and it's probably going to surprise you who, we like better than Drake London at this point.
So I don't think in the offseason you could have bought Drake London for a future first, just a random future first.
There it is.
You could not have made that deal. If
Right.
someone panicked a little bit in week 1 and says, okay, can I get a first for him? Are you giving up a future first for Drake London?
Probably not. You're right. It's crazy. And maybe if I'm really good and it's late and I'm trying to buy low, but that's right. There's multiple first round pick players and then single first round pick players. And, I made the joke, you want to go to Kansas City. I know you love this. So yeah. I said, during the process after the draft and everything, I said, can you sell Xavier Worthy for 2 first round picks right now? And I thought you could because there's so much hype around him. I think right now you could sell Xavier Worthy for 2 first round picks. There's so much hype around him. You want Xavier Worthy over Drake London, and I don't blame anybody. So right now, all of the players that are ranked in and around him are immensely more valuable. And look, if you can get that type of value where you're trading, Rashee Rice plus a first to get Drake London, it's like, well, yeah, sure. I got, the other way, you get right. Drake London and a first for Rashee or something, So maybe at that point you're starting to make some sense. But other than that,
I think London and Brooks kind of fit into a similar category too, because who's trading for Jonathan Brooks? A team that's rebuilding shouldn't be trading for running backs, and a team that's contending doesn't think Jonathan Brooks is going to be any good this year. Yep. And with Drake London, maybe if I'm a contender, I'll give up that late first, but I'd like to give up that late first for a player that I think is going to be a league, a veteran that's going to be a league winner and win me a league this year.
Yeah.
And if I'm a rebuilder, I'm not giving up an early first for Drake London. So
I know it's only week 1, but Jaden Reed or Drake London, it's like,
well,
it's a conversation, but I mean, I guess you want London, but how about George Pickens or Drake London?
Yeah, I'd probably go Pickens, which my argument in the summer was George Pickens and Drake London should have basically been drafted back to back.
Agreed.
Redraft. So for dynasty purposes, I'm not very excited about either one of their quarterback situations. But the thing I don't really get with Drake London is he's not he's really, really good at the catch point.
Yeah.
He doesn't do anything after the catch, and he doesn't really ever rate super high as a separator.
Right.
It's hard to be a great wide receiver if you don't do either one of those two things. Let's get to another guy who we're trying to figure out if he's ever going to be a great wide receiver. Jackson Smith-Njigba basically was supposed to get the free pass last year. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are both there. We're not going to hold this against you. We lied to him. It was held against him. He fell in dynasty rankings for sure, outside of the top 20 and some people outside the top 25 wide receivers.
Way back. Yep.
But there was this hope that, Tyler Lockett's 31 now. He's been hurt all preseason. it's time for Tyler Lockett to start to fade away. We've got this new offense in Seattle. It's going to be exciting. JSN's going to stop being a screen merchant. They're going to send him down the field. He's going to do great things. Tyler Lockett flat out outplays DK Metcalf and JSN. It's not just box score scouting. You look at the PFF grades. Tyler Lockett graded out in week 1 as one of the best wide receivers in the NFL in terms of performance. And JSN had a PFF grade of 57. No good at all.
Right.
Low on JSN or oh no?
Well, there's some oh no baked into the buy low, I think. But yeah, I think his price was a lot more palatable in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
We were having questions, is it Ladd McConkey or JSN in the offseason? I think I was arguing it's Ladd McConkey, but I think that was more of a Ladd McConkey take than a JSN take. But now we can look back on it and think it's a JSN take because, JSN was, way down there in terms of where you could, acquire him in Dynasty. I think I acquired him many times as like my wide receiver 4 or 5 in the way that I draft. I'd have just draft wide receivers up top in a startup and then end up with JSN and felt really good with the sort of the dice roll play. I think he falls further now. I saw some tweet. I think you might have seen it too. It was one of the fantasy points. I don't remember if it was, Graham or Scott, but they had tweeted about his first read percentage. And he was only the first read on like 5% of dropbacks
Right.
and only got 2 targets. And so look, they need to scheme whomever, right? Whichever, wide receiver you want to be good has to be schemed into the offense. And he really wasn't in week 1. We'll look to see if that changes. I would think at some point this young wide receiver with these aging wide receiver. Yeah. I mean, this whole story and narrative's got to take hold at some point, you'd think. So I would be buying low a little bit, but maybe a little bit cautiously.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't give more than a second in terms of. I'm not giving 2 seconds, so I think I might be out at that. Joe actually had a buy high question, and I saw this a couple times on Twitter as well, and people asking like, if I'm a contender, I want to flex. Tyler Lockett's back. Should I give up a 20-25 second for him? So you're probably talking about like 9 through 12. I'm going to assume that anybody who tells me that they're a contender, it really is. So we're pick 20 through 24. You fine with that for Lockett?
It's interesting because I would love to see the roster and how it all lines up because, we're going to get there on the next guy you talk about it. Sometimes, it's like certain players, depending on how deep your roster is and how deep the league is, some players in a shallow league, they're replaceable. You can find any player, anywhere for nothing to sort of fill in. They're never going to play. Other times when it's really deep, it's like, gosh, if only I could have Jacoby Myers in my 5th flex, I could get some points there. So depending upon the situation, but in general, I suppose I would consider it. Yeah. Cause Tyler Lockett's probably got a year or 2 left. If he's this good at this point. So
it has, I think it's an excellent answer. Like a shallow league, he's not worth more than a third. In a deeper league, a second's fine, especially because if the deeper league is more than 12 teams, then that pick's not quite as valuable.
Even more so, yeah.
You referenced it, another wide receiver, another absolutely awful week 1, another guy that's supposed to at some point be better than he has been. Terry McLaurin, Jaden Daniels looked fantastic as a rusher. Cliff Kingsbury looked very much like Cliff Kingsbury as a play caller. Did not have very many shots down the field, and Daniels missed McLaurin on the one big opportunity they had. Buy low on Terry McLaurin off of a basically irrelevant week 1, or oh no?
Yeah, this was the where I was going to start talking about that depth of roster and depth of starting lineup because there's certain leagues where Terry McLaurin for me, is a very valuable piece because I have deep flexes, and so in those flexes you need production. And, in leagues like that, Terry McLaurin is a valuable asset. He's not going away. It's not like he's aging out anytime soon. Was he 28, maybe 27, 28, something like that? I don't know. He's, maybe even 29. Right. I don't know. Right. 28. So 28. So I was right the first time. Just go with your gut, Scott.
Well, actually, I think 29 this weekend. So yeah, whatever you want to call him.
I know his birthday. I was going to send him a card. Thanks. Remind me. So he's got, 2-3 more years of production. He's had 4 straight years of 120 or 130 targets. I would assume that will continue. I wouldn't take, again, we talk about looking at usage. We want to look at volume of pass attempts. And, Washington only attempted 23 passes. So, in a game like that, where they're at the very, very bottom of the pass attempts in week one, that's not going to, they'll probably be a little bit on the lower side all year with a rushing quarterback, but I wouldn't expect them to average 23. 30, 35 is what you tend to see in these games generally. And, sometimes 40, 50 pass attempts in lunatic situations. So I would think that his target share will be solid. I think Jaden Daniels has the propensity to throw the ball downfield. He's a little bit more of a boom bust player. Terry McLaurin is, but I think he's still a buy low, so to speak, in the right situations when you need the production in deep flexes.
I did think it was interesting that they played a game that they were down 3 scores like for a large portion of the game, and they had 30 rush attempts and they had 24 pass attempts. And then the other thing that was not what I wanted to see, you look at the target leaders for Washington, Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson, Zach Ertz all had 4. Luke McCaffrey and Olamide Zaccheaus had 3. Like there was no concentration in this passing attack. Hopefully that changes as well. I would think
that Terry McLaurin will out target Brian Robinson for the year. I'm just going to go on a limb and say that's true.
If 33% of the pass attempts go to running backs, then it may not matter. Like the wide receivers don't matter at all in this offense. Let's get to speaking of a running back, let's get to one. DeAndre Swift, low volume, terrible production, looked awful. The Bears offense looked awful. The assumption that Caleb Williams was just going to save everything on week 1 proved incorrect. Buy low or oh no on DeAndre Swift?
Oh no. This is now multiple teams where Swift has been a disappointment. It's not me, it's you. It's not you, it's me. It's definitely you, DeAndre. It's not us. It's been him. He's the X factor at every team where he's failed and where he's been, just disappointing. No team has had him on their team and been like, we need to prioritize keeping this guy. Like literally no team has done that. That's a problem. I think, with his skill set, you would think that skill set would be something that teams would covet. So for some reason that we don't quite understand, could be locker room stuff, preparation, who knows what it is. But at the end of the day, I just don't see it with DeAndre. And I don't think many teams have seen it with DeAndre. And ironically, they have one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL parked on the bench behind him in Khalil Herbert. You'd love to see Khalil Herbert get some run. I would anyway. In our mind's eye, DeAndre Swift is better than Khalil Herbert, but in reality, it's just not the case.
It certainly has not been the case as a rusher. We know that for sure. Let's get back to wide receiver. A guy I was probably too high on going into this year, but Michael Pittman, you want to talk about the ultimate difference between a volume game and a production game. Anthony Richardson hits 2 deep bombs, but they don't go to Pittman. Pittman handles 8 of the 19 targets from Anthony Richardson, but the production's terrible. Is this a great buy low opportunity?
Absolutely. Yes. He's first read. Pittman, I think, look, you said 42% target share. If you tell me that I'm going to get that, of course he's a buy low.
Give me a 30% target share, we'll be thrilled.
That's what I'm saying. So, like, what player would you be like? If I told you they're going to get a 42% target share, you're not buying. So, these are the types of usage things that we want to look at. He's fine. You mentioned it, 19 pass attempts. Yeah, we expect the Indianapolis Colts to have one of the lower pass attempts in the NFL. All right, but they had the stone lowest, 19. We expect that number to go up. Here's the other thing. I think Anthony Richardson changed how teams are going to have to play because he made one of the best throws that you will ever see. Period. The throw where he loses his balance, has a guy in his face, and just throws off his back foot 65 yards in the air, double covered. I've never seen.
He should maybe try throwing more passes that way, because some of the passes that he threw with his feet underneath him in the pocket were not near as accurate.
Not as good, but I think he's a young quarterback who's learning, and I think there is a theme here. There's a lot of young quarterback. DeAndre Swift with Caleb Williams, Terry McLaurin with Jaden Daniels, Pittman with, right? So there's some stuff here. We talked about Bryce Young and Bo Nix at the top with Carolina and Denver. These young quarterbacks have a hard time, man. You remember, Troy Aikman led the league in interceptions and won 2 games his first year. Peyton Manning led the league in interceptions. Patrick Mahomes didn't even play in his first year. So a lot of times these quarterbacks, it takes time for them to really develop and see the game. It's fast, man. It's a fast-paced game. They've got to see it, and they've got to put it on a dot. So very few players come out and are CJ Stroud. So I think for those reasons, you got to give some of these young quarterbacks and their weapons some patience. And I think Pittman's one of them for sure. I would just have a little bit of a tepid expectation for ceiling just because of things you pointed out with the low pass volume.
But are you with me in taking Pittman over McLaurin?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We got 3 veterans here to end it. And the problem with veterans in Dynasty is when you get to the no point, it might be that there's worth nothing. And you just have to find another starter and you have no value in them.
Yeah.
Evan Ingram, 4 targets in week 1, 1 catch. Brian Thomas Jr. is all the rage. Trevor Lawrence only threw 22 passes. That's not going to happen very often.
No.
Ingram is, though, a 30-year-old tight end, supposed to be the guy on my contender rosters that's helping me win a championship. If he's on somebody else's rosters, is a buy low, try to go get him, or is this an no?
Buy low. Yeah, for me, tight ends, generally age pretty gracefully. I'm not thinking that he's going to age out. At some point, of course, they all do, but I think he's fine. He did have 20% target share, 19, whatever, 4 out of 21 pass attempts, I believe. So yeah, it's a career low for Trevor Lawrence and all the games, all the shitty games, whether he's been hurt. Every game he started, he's always thrown more than 21 total pass attempts. So you can't take the absolute stone lowest and then extrapolate that. That was just a weird game. It was in the heat, the humidity. Not that, there won't be other game conditions, but he got his target share, just didn't connect. He was a target monster last year. Brian Thomas, actually, I think, helps. At this particular point, they've got to worry about him down the field. Gabe Davis is out there every snap. Christian Kirk, they've got good weapons. I do think still Evan Ingram will be a security blanket for Trevor when they're throwing the football. I mean, he's going to have near 21 attempts on some drives this year. You know what I mean?
Right. No, absolutely. I'm probably a buy low, but it's got to be low because it is a 30-year-old. And when the end comes, speaking of when the end comes, Davante Adams, I hope that we're not like his career is going to be ended just by mediocre quarterback play. But Brock Bowers actually leads this team in targets in week 1. We saw the decrease in efficiency last year with Adams, with Aiden O'Connell. Gardner Minshew wins the job. He was fine on the targets that he saw, but not the clear number 1 alpha that we've seen in the past. And we know that touchdowns are going to be a problem for this Raiders offense. Adams, another guy who's really only on your roster because you think he might help you win a championship this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, he's a little bit of a buy low. I think, you can only project maybe a year or 2 here, but I don't think he's aging out. I think you pointed out the Aiden O'Connell and now Gardner Minshew doesn't exactly stoke confidence in anybody, but he's been a target monster. He got good targets here. It's not like he was forgotten. I don't have his target in front of me, but he's on a pace for 1,000 yards just in this one game. You know what I mean? It's like, it wasn't great. I think Brock Bowers, by the way, I think you could make a case he's the tight end 1 in Dynasty right now. I know Laporta had an okay game and McBride's been my tight end 2, but I think I'd take Brock Bowers over all of them right now, man. That's all I needed to see was him earn targets. I think he's legit, man. He is so good. But yeah, I think I would be willing to buy low on Davante Adams. I think you can probably do so with a player that doesn't even play on your roster plus a pick or something. You know what I mean? Like you can,
right.
You know what I mean? I think you can get some sort of young player, Jermaine Burton, but like Burton and a pick and some other stuff. Like I think you could really put together a poo-poo platter, as I like to call it, which is a bunch of things that really don't matter to anybody, but add up to value to another owner who might say, that's enough for me to move off of, multiple picks, multiple thirds or whatever, that type of thing.
Right. Yeah. The problem I have with him is I think he's probably a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 at best, and he's over 30. So it's kind of like the Terry McLaurin discussion we had about, like, what's your league type? Does he really even matter? And then at his age, he could turn into 0.
He could, but here's the other thing, though, Heath. Terry McLaurin, 120 and 130 targets over the last 4 years. Davante Adams, 170, 160, 150 over the last 4 years. I mean, So his fall from grace, he becomes Terry McLaurin, if he has a 30% decrease in production. So, for me, Devontae's fall from even what we're talking right now, his pace is 1,000 yards. So I think our expectations are just so high for Devontae, and rightfully so. He's been that good. But I think that he's still a useful player in your lineup for the rest of the season. I really believe it. I think he's going to have some big games.
The last one, I think we can all just say, oh no,
Gigantic.
Deshaun Watson. There's absolutely nothing to feel good. Now, if you wanted to give some context and make a buy low case, I guess it would be that, and this is fair, both of his offensive tackles were out of the game.
Yeah.
They were playing against arguably the best pass rush in the NFL and the Dallas Cowboys. That's a bad team to not have either one of your tackles. But it's now partial parts of 3 seasons now since he arrived in Cleveland, where he's just not he looked like a below average NFL quarterback. So
yeah, bad.
In a super flex league, do you even have any low open buying low, or are you just completely and totally all the way out?
Here's the thing. I'm an oh no, and I put it in big bold letters on my notes.
Yeah.
But here's the thing is that everybody is feeling this way. There was even some news this morning. I hate even talking about the stuff,
right.
But like I read that thing. I don't know if you read this thing.
Yeah, there's another. He's been sued again.
But I read like what it states.
We won't get too much.
I'm not going there, but I'm just saying like what the so like because of these things, which makes me feel terrible. Of course, the sentiment around him is so bad that like could you trade Bryce Young and get Deshaun Watson? You probably could or something. I mean, in other words, you could probably buy super, super low. And for those reasons, I guess it's still, but man, you watch him and he's bad. He's abjectly bad. I mean, you said below average. I mean, you watch him, you're like, look, if there was no contract, he'd be done, right? He would not be starting if there were no. And
I think that the way they restructured the contract, they made it even harder to walk away from him after this year. So I think he's probably, unless there is something legal that happens, he's probably going to be on the team. It's just, I'm not even sure he's going to be a top 24 fantasy quarterback, which is amazing to say after the start that we saw from him. Let's take one more break and then we'll get into some deeper waiver wire guys at the end of the show.
Yes, sir.
You hear that? It's the steady pulse of the world's game that's turning fans into family and sports into passion. You hear that? It's the heartbeat of American soccer. The USL on CBS Sports Network.
We are back. We've got some names here to talk about.
They are names.
Like when you're talking, this is the thing, and we've had certainly some hits on the waiver wire and Dynasty over the last year and a half on this show. Yeah. But there's no reason to talk about the guys that everybody else is talking about this week because they're already rostered in Dynasty leagues.
Yes.
But there are some guys
go get Jordan Mason,
go get Jordan Mason. He's only rostered in 67% of CBS leagues.
Right.
Going to be rostered in all of your Dynasty leagues, most likely. There were 2 quarterbacks that I put on the list, and I put the question mark by Malik Willis's name. And that just tells you how bad he has been as a starter so far in the NFL, because any quarterback who becomes a starter after an injury becomes a must-add. I'm not even sure in Superflex Dynasty.
Yeah, I was going to say,
sure
in a 1 quarterback league, this is an absolute zero.
No. So I put Malik Willis. I also put Jameis Winston because I do think there's a possibility that Deshaun is just going to get hurt again. You got absolutely destroyed in that game in week 1.
Yeah.
In a Superflex league, you want to make sure both those guys are rostered.
Yes, rostered. I'm always rostered. Like, so, these deep wide receivers, you don't need them. You don't need to go so deep at wide receiver. It's very unlikely that one of your deep wide receivers is going to be a difference maker. Maybe, you can play him once or something, but, so I'm deep at running back, deep at backup quarterback, because right now, if you have Malik Willis, you can sort of throw him to the, Jordan Love owner and potentially get 2/3. I floated him out there for a second and everybody told me to go, never mind. But, and I think that's right. I think they're probably smart to try and use a second to get a different type of starting quarterback. Maybe they can go get a Sam Darnold or something potentially for that second. So I think that those owners are smart to do so. But Malik Willis is worth something. He wishes he would be as good as Deshaun Watson, though.
He started 3 games. He's yet to break triple digits in passing yards.
It's bad.
Maybe there will be some LaFleur magic, but I don't really think so. Let's talk about the one running back that I had on the list. And this is a guy who was definitely rostered and then dropped, and then maybe rostered again and then dropped. And he was rostered in 17% of CBS leagues. So I think he's probably on the waiver wire in a couple of dynasty leagues out there. Alexander Madison, getting ready to Alexander Madison, Zamir White. It sure looks like he is somehow the passing downs back. I never saw that coming, this turn in Alexander Madison's career, but he's the third down and passing downs back for the Raiders currently. They also said, we're going to go with the hot hand approach. He had the hot hand in week 1 and played more than Zamir White. And if you just look at the Raiders as they're constructed, they look like a team that's going to lose more than they win, probably playing from behind. I think they're playing the Ravens this week. They might be down by 21 in the first quarter. Alexander Madison might just play more snaps than Zamir White all season long.
I was a fading Zamir White all off season, and as I got closer and closer to the season, I felt worse and worse about that fade. I was like, oh boy, I think I stepped in one here. He's probably going to be pretty useful, and maybe he still might be. But the reason I faded Zamir is that, there's just no real track record to believe that he's going to be a bell cow in the NFL. And you went there with the pass game work. There's got to be someone else that is going to take some of that pass game work. In this case, it's Alexander Madison. Obviously, I think most of the leagues that, the sickos play in, Alexander Madison is rostered. If he's not, of course, pick him up. I don't know exactly how much, but like any backup running back, and that's the whole point, is you got to have these quarterbacks and running backs rostered, because if Zamir White goes down, Alexander Madison's an RB2, 3.
Well, I think what happened with the Raiders situation probably is that people thought they were rostering Raiders RB2 Dylan Laube. And then he's inactive week 1, and Alexander Madison's playing more snaps than anybody else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's the odds that Dylan Laube is any better than Alexander Madison? I mean, 50-50 and at best. And Madison's been a pro. I don't think he's very good in terms of like high-end talent, but he's good enough to stick around and, good enough to play over a kid from New Hampshire or whatever,
Absolutely. I've got 3 wide receivers on the list. We spent the entire summer hearing DeMarcus Robinson hype, and Puka Nacua goes down in week 1. I think those people felt really good about the DeMarcus Robinson situation. And he and Tyler Johnson had the same number of targets. And Tyler Johnson I thought he looked pretty good.
Yeah. Dude, Tyler Johnson looked good when he played in Tampa Bay with Tom Brady. I thought, there'd be some moments I'd be like, dude, because I'm a Tyler Johnson OG truther. So this one's kind of weird. The other one that I saw, did you see Jordan Matthews is like a tight end?
He's a tight end now. Yes.
I was like, wait, is that
Jordan
Matthews?
The difference is that Tyler Johnson finally looked good. Jordan Matthews looked like a tight end for the Carolina Panthers, a backup tight end for the Carolina Panthers.
But I was just like, my trutherism was kind of having some feelings, So but the Tyler Johnson one, he's a sort of I thought he was a Chris Godwin sort of clone in that sort of middle of the field technician, and that's what he looked like for a quarterback who's pretty accurate, especially finding spots in the zone. Look, you could do a lot worse than Tyler Johnson. I will be putting in embarrassing bids on Tyler Johnson, and I will be wanting him on every single one of my dynasty rosters. And I am not apologizing, but I'm just telling you don't have to follow my wake on this one. I think that's probably a mistake, but I'm doing it.
Well, and I think the thing is, the Puka injury obviously opens up a lot of opportunity in this offense.
Yeah.
But Cooper Kupp, the guy who's up there in age and has had multiple hamstring injuries, is now getting 21 targets in a game. It could be Tyler Johnson.
WR1.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. So I'm definitely adding him. Devon Vele. Some credit to Benjamin Albright. Like he was telling us all preseason that Vele was the clearly in this role. And there's no doubt about it. Saw 8 targets in his first NFL game, caught all 8 of them. Now, I think he had probably a combined 30 yards as well.
Yeah.
But like that type of guy as a rookie seeing 8 targets needs to be rostered in pretty much all dynasty leagues.
For sure.
Certainly not. So go at him off the waiver wire as well, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we were seeing him added. And I sometimes I just sit there and go, wait, I do the research. I'll look and be like, Vele, let's see, 25-year-old rookie, undrafted. What the hell am I even doing here? And sure enough, he sees 8 targets in week 1. It's absolutely stunning to me that this is happening. And this is what I'm talking about with Sean Payton. It's just like, this is it. Last year was Lil Jordan Humphrey, and like, I don't know, man. There's just so much with this Denver situation that is so infuriating, and who knows what will happen to Vele. Maybe he'll be a star. Maybe he'll never play again. It's like, it's so fickle there that I don't know. But yes, of course he has to be rostered, because if he's going to see any modicum of targets, especially in PPR, what he scored, 10 plus points, with just those 8 targets. So, I think it was 8 targets for 35 yards or something terrible. It was awful. But point of the matter is, it doesn't matter. If he's going to see those targets in a dink and dunk offense with Bo Nix, it's worth it.
I've started working out recently, and I'm okay with going to the gym and lifting. I've gotten to the point to where I hate cardio. I hate it so much.
Right.
And everybody tells me it's good for my heart, it's good for my longevity, it's going to make my life better in the future. And I think we finally saw some proof of that in week 1. Alec Pierce, cardio king from 2023. It paid off. 3 catches, 125 yards, and a touchdown, just when everyone had finally given up on Alec Pierce. Do we have to pick him back up?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. It was always going to be there is some trepidation here because of Josh Downs. Josh Downs will come back at some point. He's got the high ankle, but look, that could be a while. Who knows exactly with Josh Downs? And those high ankles tend to, you're not quite the same. You're playing, but you're not the same for a while. It could be a tough uphill battle for Josh Downs physically. And then you've got Ad Mitchell and Pierce and Ashton Doolin showing out as well with a big catch, 51-yard touchdown as well. So just saying, you could do a lot worse than Pierce and Doolin.
Yeah. Pierce, you could do a lot worse than Pierce and Doolin. I mean, if you want to talk about an oh no moment, just maybe like for the NFL and for fantasy football, receiving yards were way down. It's Pierce and Doolin that we're getting excited about. That's the state of the league. I just thank you very much for being here today. Get one more time, just tell everybody where they can find your work and what you'll be doing this season.
Yeah, theundroppables.com. We'll be recording another episode of The Undrafted this afternoon. It usually hits. It does appear on the Player Profiler Network as well. So whether it be The Undroppables or at the Player Profiler Network, you'll see that pod and all of our stuff on our YouTube page. So check it out.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Nada. Thank you to everybody who was in the chat. We will talk to you next Tuesday.